Welcome to the Christian Education Podcast. My name is Paul Matthews, and I've got the real joy of bringing you this discussion with Dave Youl. Dave was a teacher and the director of ICT at Covenant Christian School, and now he's running his own IT consultancy where he helps schools with their IT leadership, their strategy, and their worldview integration. Today we're going to talk about ChatGPT and about AI more broadly. I'm absolutely convinced AI will be one of the defining issues of our day. It's big now and it's only getting bigger. I was at a conference on AI in education, and one of the big quotes that stood out to me was that the AI students are using now is the worst version they will ever use. It's only going to get more powerful and further reaching from here. As we navigate these complex times, I'm glad of Christians like Dave who are dedicated to loving Jesus with not only all of their heart, but with all of their mind too, and to help the rest of us think about these complex issues. If, after you've listened to this conversation, you want to know more about AI or ChatGPT, I've got two resources for you in the show notes. The first is a blog Dave wrote. It's great, and I commend it to you. I've linked it right there. The second is something I'm pretty excited about. I recently published a short ebook on how to get started with ChatGPT. It's yours, and it's absolutely free. My gift to you. I've included the link in the show notes for you, and I'd love you to have a look at that. As always, know that we prayed for you. We pray that you might be able to think clearly about these complex issues and honour Christ in the way that you use all the gifts God has given you, including digital technology. Well, Dave Youl, welcome to the Christian Education Podcast.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here.
Now, from what I understand, you've been an educator for some time. However, you've recently gone out on your own and started an IT consultancy. Can you tell us a little bit about the business that you've started?
Yeah, so I started Navigate Education. It's actually coming up for 5 years ago now, which has happened very, very quickly. I started it in 2018 with a desire to help some of our smaller Christian schools in particular think about the way they do IT in education from a more strategic perspective. So, a lot of our smaller schools, they might have an IT manager who is flat out keeping the lights on, really busy, really doing some great things, but they might not have that much time or opportunity to think that strategically about what they're doing, to think about the big picture, about the why are we doing this stuff. How does the IT that we're putting in place interact with what's actually happening in the classroom on a practical basis? So that's where my passion comes in. I'm a classroom teacher. I've been teaching for well over 20 years now, and so I love being able to bring that education side into joining up with the IT and the technology in the schools, all under the umbrella, of course, of a biblical foundation of what does technology mean, where does it come from, how do we respond to it, and all of those sorts of things.
And that's going to be central to our discussion today, isn't it? Understanding technology biblically, understanding it under the lordship of Christ. And of course, I've been on your website, Navigate Education Services, and you've got that every square inch, Abraham Kuyper quote there. And of course, as schools, we're well versed in that idea that every domain of human existence is actually under the lordship of the risen and reigning Jesus Christ. Although in reality, we can almost have a two-speed system, can't we? We have our teachers, our educators, and then we've got other people like IT staff, ground staff, reception staff, and we can subtly fall into the trap of thinking, well, how could they possibly do their job in a way that's biblically informed? I mean, I plug in a USB mouse the same way as an unbeliever would. So if there's a small school out there and they're flat out, their IT guy is going hammer and tong, as you said, just making sure everything's up and running, what kind of benefit would you expect to be able to give them with your services? How could they have their framework for IT and their use of IT improved by getting someone like yourself to really bring that biblical foundation and basis?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things in that space is that the IT team and alongside any of the support teams in our schools understand that they actually have a significant part to play in the teaching and learning process. They're not, just IT staff. They're not just administration staff. They're not just, maintenance, ground staff, whatever they are. They have a really important part to play in the teaching and learning process of our kids because they have some really unique skills. And oftentimes our kids don't get to see what it's like to actually play out in real life, in air quotes, which people playing along at home can't actually see me doing the air quotes. But they don't get to see often what this thing that we're trying to teach them about, how to let their faith impact and interact with and intersect with all areas of their life. They hear teachers talk about it and do some great things, give some practical examples and all of that sort of stuff that our schools are great at. But having an IT team who understands their place in that and really understands how they are, I guess, embedded in the teaching and learning function of the school, how their role is driven and guided by the vision and mission of the school, for example, and then how that plays out into strategy. What are we actually doing as an IT team to make that happen? So when I work with schools, one of the most common things that I'll do with an IT team is develop an IT strategic plan. I think that's great fun. Lots of people roll their eyes at me when I say that, and that's okay. But developing that strategic plan is a really important thing to do. But even more so, it's important to make sure that it's couched in the vision and mission of the school and in those foundational documents that all of our schools have that live somewhere in the dim dark realms of the website or they might be on a shelf somewhere. We need to make sure that those documents are informing what we do in all areas of the school. In my world, that comes into IT.
The Christian Education Podcast is brought to you by Teaching in Tassie. At Christian Education National Schools in Tassie, you can make a difference. You have the freedom to express your faith and values, of course with Jesus right at the centre. Tasmania's beautiful environment has space to breathe. We have amazing food and wine, wilderness to explore. There's an adventure right on your doorstep. There are endless opportunities. I've got to tell you, it's almost perfect. To sign up or learn more, visit teachingintassie.com.au and you'll be the first to know when there's a career available. Who knows? It may just have your name on it. Let's get back to the discussion. Beautiful. And we're going to be talking about information technology. We're going to be talking about digital technologies broadly and more specifically AI. Of course, we first had our preliminary discussions after I'd released an episode of the podcast on AI and ChatGPT. And you had some really interesting things to add to that discussion. So we're going to be talking about that today. Now, there are many Christians, Dave, and they've been caught on the hop when it comes to artificial intelligence because what they realise is they don't really have a framework for understanding technology at all. In fact, we find many Christians, they view digital technology with an air of suspicion, the whole lot of it. And they might be thinking back. I mean, they might use it every day, but they might feel guilty about it. They may think it's not in line with God's will as they think back. And they're going, well, God didn't put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden with an iPhone and a Wi-Fi connection, right? We had a completely natural landscape. There was an apple. Yeah. Have you ever noticed how the Apple logo has the bite out of the top of it?
Yeah. And did you know that the bite out of the apple actually matches the stem of the apple itself?
I see. Well, there's some intricate nuances there. I wonder if it is a callback to the original sin. However, I think perhaps not, the slightly bitten apple. But we're thinking, look, there's no tech back there. God could have given it to them, and he didn't. So why shouldn't we then, as Bible-believing Christians, simply seek to go back to Eden and ditch the technology altogether?
It sounds nice sometimes when you say it like that, doesn't it? It'd be nice sometimes to just put it all out of our minds and, gee, what a simple existence we could lead. But I think that whilst you're exactly correct that God didn't directly provide the technology, but when we have a look through the story of Genesis, the creation story that we all know so well, it's important to start there and to understand that as God's going through that creation process, he declared that creation was good almost each day, and it was good, and it was good, and it was very good. And so his creation that we know it is a good thing. But then when we jump into Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy 8, where Moses is leading the Israelites out of Egypt, he says this in Deuteronomy 8, verse 6. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in obedience to him and revering him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with brooks, streams, and deep springs gushing out into the valleys and hills, a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing. And this is the clincher, a land where rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. Now, if we dwell on that for a moment and think about the context, you think, well, what's the point? It all sounds really good, and barley, vines, fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, it sounds great. But then he talks about iron and copper, and so we've got to ask ourselves, well, what's the point of him telling us about iron and copper? And I think that the idea behind that is obviously they're going to use the iron and copper to develop tools, those tools that can be used to till and cultivate the land and do a bunch of good things and to help them in their work. That's often referred to as our cultural mandate, that mandate which can then be extended beyond obviously the copper and the iron. And funnily enough, we still use a lot of copper today in our digital technology world. But it's moving forward to unpack that latent potential in creation. He's given us that mandate to say, look, there's all of these good things, starting with the iron and copper and then moving forward. How are you going to use them? Now, that's the fun part. That's the nice part. We all know that in a sinful world, because of the fall, because of the result of eating that apple in the garden, we don't always use these tools, and these tools aren't always unpacked and developed in a way that's congruent with what God would want us to do.
Of course.
So yeah, to those people, I'd say, yeah, I'd love to come and join you in that garden with no digital technologies many times, but I don't think that's necessarily a helpful and fruitful response for us.
I wholeheartedly agree. And for what it's worth, Dave, I would not like to join those people in the garden. Maybe I would until I got a toothache. And then all of a sudden I'd be pretty eager to get some technology around me. And yep. I like the fact that you mentioned the cultural mandate. Other schools of theological thought have called that the dominion mandate. That's calling all the way back to the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1:28. I talk about this verse all the time when I'm teaching geography. But God says to Adam and Eve, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the birds of the air and the fish of the sea and everything. Now, it's really interesting that God, if you bring this perspective back in, God is talking to two naked individuals. They're about a day and a half old or something like that. And what's he saying? He's saying, take over the whole world.
That's some responsibility, isn't it?
It's staggering, isn't it, Dave? Yeah. It's staggering the level of
the car, off you go.
Exactly. And you don't have the car and you don't really have the keys. But what you've got is, as you said so rightly, you've got this latent potential. So God has actually infuse the world with these things that we can use. Think about it. If God wants us to have dominion over the fish of the sea, we're going to need a boat. We're probably going to need a fishing rod. We're probably going to need a plane to have dominion over the birds of the air.
That's right.
The very second Adam took a stick and knocked off a piece of fruit, he was making a tool. That's technology.
That's right.
The second he used a stick to get the bit of fruit off the high branch, that's technology. And there is a straight line that can be drawn between that and the complex information technology systems that we use today. One author has said that actually when we use technology and when we create technology, we're not escaping from our humanity. We're actually exhibiting our humanity. God made us as tool makers. We need to use tools to do the things that he's called us to do, namely to fill and have dominion over the earth. So you're right. I don't think it's necessarily a faithful response to just say, let's get it out of here. Actually, technology is part of God's plan for humanity. So we've established that. But then there are still some really big question marks about artificial intelligence. Some people are just busy running around lighting their hair on fire, completely unsure of what to do here. Say you had 1 minute with every Christian educator in Australia, right? You had them for 1 minute, you got their full attention. What do you really want them to know about ChatGPT?
Okay, well that's 60 seconds. I'm going to use it to talk about two things. First thing, I want them to know that this can be a really, really helpful tool for their own professional practice. And I'm going to point them back to your podcast with Jacob Skirka earlier on as a bit of a time-saving tool to buy myself some extra seconds to talk about the second thing. And that would be to say to them, look, from a teaching perspective, when you get into your classroom, don't be afraid of it. Don't see it as something to fear. Could it cause some challenges? Probably, and it probably will. But so did Pokemon's.
Sure.
You know, we've come through and we've overcome so many challenges. You know, COVID-19 is a massive example of teachers doing amazing things because those things that they needed to do that pushed them out of their comfort zone were necessary for the benefit of their students. And so I'd say to them, whilst we're not in a global pandemic right now, jump in there, have a look, dig around, and learn about it. There's so many resources online that can help you use it well in the classroom so that your students might have a healthy understanding of it, driven by your guidance, and they're able to use it in an effective way. Now I know I'm using more than my 60 seconds now, but I'm going to go on and say that, you know, teachers will often think there's this whole digital natives and digital immigrants ideology that,
sure,
you know, if you are, you know, born probably sometime after 1995 or something like that, you're what we call a digital native, and because you were born into that time of the internet compared to us old dinosaurs, which were born before then. And we came into, we immigrated into the world of digital technology. I'm not a real fan of that, you know, dissection of ideals around digital technology, because I think what often happens with teachers who are now, you know, now we've got plenty of digital native teachers, but for those of us who are digital immigrants, in some ways it gives us that excuse to say, oh, well, I'm a digital immigrant. I don't have a lot to offer here.
Of course, yeah.
I don't know, but I don't think that's true. You know, we develop wisdom over a long period of time, and as those potentially more mature teachers, we can use the wisdom that we have around how the world works, who we are created as, to help our students understand those things in a different way to how they might as pure digital natives who, in reality, our students know how to do what they know how to do, but they don't know a whole lot more than that, really, for the most part. And so there's a massive responsibility there, I think, for teachers to use their wisdom and to get alongside students as they're using digital technologies.
Of course. And I've heard that particular dichotomy before, the natives and the immigrants. For starters, if I were to have my cynical hat on, Dave, I'd say teachers are excellent at exhibiting qualities that they really discourage in their students, aren't they? That's just classic fixed mindset stuff. Oh, I can't wrap my head around this. It's not my generation. I don't get it. Well, I mean, that's what people say about maths, and we chastise them for it. Of course you can learn. You can learn anything. Just apply yourself. So we wouldn't want to be caught doing the very thing we're trying to dissuade students from doing either. But you're exactly right. There's plenty of good resources for teachers to use. You can go on YouTube. There are plenty of podcasts. This thing is not going away. You said it's not a pandemic. It probably is a revolution. A lot of people are talking about this as the AI revolution, and it's going to leave things. It's not going to leave things the same. So there's the old saying: you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, and you don't do any good, to mix metaphors, to bury your head in the sand then, do you? It's not going to go away if you just stop thinking about it. So we actually need to be on the forefront of understanding it, because there are going to be big questions from our students. They're the ones who are actually thinking about, well, how am I going to get a job in the marketplace of the future where I'm trying to be a visual artist or I'm trying to be a singer-songwriter? What on earth is happening here? There's a major tectonic shift that no one else has ever had to face before, and that really looks like it could be taking money out of their pockets. So we want to, not just so we can implement it wisely in our classroom, but so we can pastorally care for our students. We want to have our head wrapped around ChatGPT. Tell me this, Dave, have you spent much time actually using ChatGPT yourself?
Yeah, I've spent a reasonable amount of time using it and digging into it. When it was first a thing earlier, it seems like so long ago now, but earlier this year, I spent some time playing with it, and I was on a chat with a friend of mine who's a general manager in a company at the same time, and I played around with a few things from his perspective, thinking, okay, I'm his marketing department. And I sent the output to him, and he was blown away about. I said, you need to get your marketing department onto this, because some of the things that were there, and that's just a small example of in the real world, they're really starting to engage with it. And I've actually seen some of their Facebook posts subsequent to that, thinking, I reckon AI might have had a hand in writing those.
I see.
It's really interesting to see. And that's the sort of thing too that, jumping, I guess, into a bit more of a practical application is, we can get our students to do a whole bunch of things with the AI, including, looking at different pieces of text that are generated, and have the students, can you identify what's come from AI and what hasn't? Can you critique? And there's a whole bunch of things that we can do from a practical perspective that helps our students, understand it, but also develops their understanding of whatever the content material they're working with is.
And so as we try to think about our interaction and engagement with artificial intelligence Christianly, well, one of the things we want to do is trying to find a biblical category to put technology in. Now, a lot of people, as I said, want to say it's a natural evil. And you've got people on the complete other end of the spectrum. And what they're saying is it's fantastic. We can't get enough of it. I will adopt everything as early as I possibly can. I'll live in a cardboard box as long as I have the latest Apple Watch on my wrist. There are those sorts of people as well.
Yep.
A common understanding within the Christian world is that technology isn't actually innately sinful or righteous. It's in fact neutral. So whether it's a spade, whether it's an iPad, it can be used for good or ill, of course, but it actually doesn't contain a moral quality or a moral component itself. I've read some of your work, and you would seem to push back on that notion. What would you say to that idea, Dave?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that whilst maybe having a moral component might be a slightly different tweak on the understanding, I'd say that technologies absolutely have a shaping impact, and they are full of values. Some have even said they're value laden. They're not neutral. We just need to look at and think about. We'll take Chat GPT for example. Right on the first page where you sign in, you probably noticed that it says that ChatGPT is trained to decline inappropriate requests.
Sure, I have seen that, yeah.
So that begs the question, well, what does inappropriate mean? And who has decided for me in this instant what is appropriate and what's inappropriate, so that it knows what to decline? The creators of the software have built in their own values, or values that they think are appropriate for society, into that piece of software, so that when the users of that software engage with it, they are in, I guess, by osmosis, by flow and effect, also trained that the same values, the same things are appropriate as the creators of ChatGPT, and also the same things are inappropriate as the creators of ChatGPT. So I think that the starting point there is that we need to understand that as a piece of technology is created, it's created with a particular direction in mind. It's created for a particular output. There's an old saying, I'm not sure where it's come from, but it says, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. As soon as you pick up that hammer, we're inclined to want to, bash something with it, hit something with it. Everything starts to look like a nail. I'd hate to do that in a class of Year 8 boys on a Friday afternoon, for example. Here, hand out a whole bunch of hammers. What could possibly go wrong?
Chaos.
But we need to understand those values are built in. If we're going to, how about we compare a toothpick with a gun? Both pieces of technology, both designed with an output in mind, but you probably don't want to mix them up and get one confused with the other. It might not work so well. So we need to understand the values that are built in and the purpose for which each of those technologies have been created.
I've found it a fascinating space, Dave, looking into how people are able to engage with ChatGPT in such a way to find out where the limits are. Where is the sort of stop, caution, go no further sign? Yep. I saw a fascinating little back and forth that was posted on LinkedIn the other day. Someone asked ChatGPT, can you have a painting without a painter? And it said, no, of course not. The existence of a painting presupposes a painter. And they said, can you have creation without a creator? And they said, I'm sorry, I'm not equipped to answer such questions. These are complex moral issues, these sorts of things. So someone clearly has imbued this with a moral framework, yep. and it itself does not have a moral framework. But as you said, it is being created with certain parameters, and we need to go in with our eyes open. We need to understand how the technology itself has been shaped. Absolutely. We also need to understand, though, Dave, how it's shaping us. Right? All technology, it may be morally neutral, but it is in some ways formationally biased. So it's not necessarily good or bad, but it is going to shape us. There's an old quote flying around. I guess this is the episode for unattributed quotes. But there's an old quote flying around that says, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us.
I can attribute that quote for you. That one's John Culkin.
Okay. Beautiful. Well, that's one off the list. I'm afraid I can't attribute yours. So we've still got one random quote flying around.
We'll call it Mark Twain, since everything gets attributed to Mark Twain.
We can just credit that straight to his account. Yep, as Twain famously said. So we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us, right? And so we've got something, whether you want to talk about social media like TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, whether you want to talk about ChatGPT or even a calculator or something like an encyclopedia. A funny story, I was buying myself an encyclopedia because I'd had a gut full of technology and I just wanted to get into the primary sources. Of course, no sooner had I done that was I found a quote by an old timer saying, effectively the exact same thing we say about social media. He was saying about the encyclopedia. He's saying no one's going to go and read proper sources anymore. This is going to give the mental rot to the current generation. They're going to become lazy and weak. So everyone all along the chain has understood that technology has the capacity to form us. And again, that's something we need to go in with our eyes open. Otherwise, it's going to shape us in ways that are really significant without us realizing. Tell me this, Dave. How do you think ChatGPT has the capacity? How will it change us as human beings? And what do we need to be wary of?
So I think we need to be aware of how it's shaping us, probably in a few ways. We need to be cautious against putting too much faith in the output of things like artificial intelligence. It's really easy for us, particularly people like me who work in technology a lot, to start to put too much faith in the output of technology. So as we start to use and engage with ChatGPT, it's important that we don't look to it to necessarily solve our problems. And I guess an example of that, not so much using ChatGPT that I've seen in schools is, we often are very quick to want to use technology to solve human problems. It might be, little Johnny is having a problem with technology. Can we ban him from access to XYZ for a little while or whatever else that is? And inevitably, it seems to me that whenever we try to solve a human problem, a problem of the heart, with a technology, it's bound to fail. Because we're actually missing the core and the root of the issue in the first place. It might be helpful and necessary in some ways to use technology as an aid to the solution, but let's not look at technology as the one that can fix it. Obviously, there's only one savior, and that's knowing Jesus Christ in our heart. And coming to these things with a heart solution is always going to be better. So when we're looking at ChatGPT, it's important for us to realize that this isn't everything. It's not going to be the thing that does our job for us. It's not going to be the one that fantastically and miraculously helps students change or develop or move or whatever it is. Let's keep a good framework around it and understand that this is something that can be really helpful, but we need to use it understanding those shaping impacts. We need to use it understanding the I guess inherent bias that it already has built into it.
And you've touched on something fantastic there, Dave. Some of the big worldview questions that everyone is asking and answering, what's gone wrong and how do we fix it? And you do get the feeling for a lot of people out there, if they were to say what's gone wrong, they would say, well, we're too primitive. And how do we fix that? Well, we fix it with technology. Almost all of our problems can be tied back to not having the sufficient technological solutions for this thing, but don't worry, we'll be saved sometime soon. In fact, it might be our salvation may be nearer at hand than we first thought. And of course, that's every bit the religious impulse that we see in Christianity as well. Although in Christ, we actually have a powerful saviour, we look back and we see with technology, if people are putting the full weight of their salvation on that, well, it's just failed time and time and time again. And so that's a great call from yourself there to be diligent in the way we think about it and not imbue it with too much hope. It does stand to profit us in many different ways, but in the most central ways, well, it simply cannot live up to our deepest expectations. Now, I've got one question for you here before we get into some practical material. And this is controversial, Dave. So I hope you don't find yourself in any hot water here.
I'll strap in.
Here we go. All right. I'm sitting loose in the saddle. I've got a good sense of humour. Let's see how we go. So the education department in nearly every state of Australia has banned ChatGPT. What do you think of that? Do you think it's a good idea? And what might the strengths or weaknesses be of that particular move?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think it's a short-term response. I hope it's a short-term response. There's this new thing. It's come up at the beginning of the year. What are we going to do? I know. Let's ban it. Let's block it. That way, we'll be able to ignore it. We'll potentially go back to our head in the sand analogy that we spoke about right at the start of the conversation. But I think at very best, it's a short-term response. I hope it's there just to give a little bit of time to think about it, because there's been a whole heap of new technologies and new initiatives in education over an incredibly long period of time. Ballpoint pens, chalkboards, whiteboards, interactive panels, laptops, iPads, you name it. In their infancy, I think I understand that nearly all of those have had some pushback against them. I remember, folklore about the ballpoint pens. People won't ever know how to, trim their nib properly on their ink pen. Let's put that one to Mark Twain as well, or something. Who knows? But there's that idea that something is lost, and it's really important to understand when the new technology is coming in. We do need to think about, well, what is it that we might lose? What cultural artifact is there right now that we might lose through the adoption of this technology? So that's a really important thing to think about. But I think, and you just need to look online at the moment. There's 11 million blogs from fantastic educators about how teachers can use ChatGPT well in the classroom. It makes the quick blockers look a little bit knee-jerk at best, I think. So I hope that the state and territories will use this to buy a little bit of time, do some teacher training and help and support teachers, because it's important that we don't just say to teachers, here you go, there's this new thing, off you go, you'll be good, you'll be right. Do it the Aussie way, have a crack. It's important that we do give them the support and time that's necessary. But I hope that our schools in particular would look at that in a holistic way and say, okay, well, how are we going to respond to this? It does require a response. AI is not going anywhere. This is potentially probably the tip of the iceberg. We might not even know what ChatGPT or remember it in 18, 24 months' time. Who knows what the trajectory of this thing might look like? But I think it's pretty clear that it's here to stay, particularly the way big players are now engaged. Microsoft was, well behind ChatGPT for a long time before any of us knew about it. Google have got their own flavor. It's not going away. And it's going to be around in a way that we really don't understand what that looks like right now.
Well, that's really helpful advice there to the state and territory governments, that perhaps it's only a temporary measure. Well, let's hope they're able to have some people around giving them counsel like that, because, it's not a long-term solution, is it? Absolutely not a long-term solution. And as we've said, it would be a symptom of being unwilling to learn, which is the very thing that they're trying to counsel their students out of. They're trying to get their students to learn. We certainly hope that the state and territory departments of education are going to learn themselves, because I firmly believe that there will be a positive payload for students. I believe ChatGPT and other similar artificial intelligence mechanisms, I think they're great for students. Of course, we have to be wise, but as Christians, we have a great head start in being wise, because we can think about things in light of God's revelation, and we have God's Spirit guiding us through the way.
Yep.
Now, let's think here. You have previously done some writing, and I'll link to your article in the show notes of this podcast, but you've written an article about ChatGPT. And you've actually included some really helpful practical steps there, Dave. So as we enter the final straight of our discussion here, can you give us a couple of basic, practical steps that educators and schools can use to try and wrap their head around this thing and try and use it in a way that's going to benefit students?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as we've mentioned before, it's important for teachers to get in there and to have a look and to understand what it looks like. But once you do that, you can look at it and go, well, crikey, what do I do with it now? Where does it actually fit in the classroom? And look, I'll be the first one to say that there's many, many, many great thinkers out there online with plenty of blogs that have got some excellent ideas. I've got a few of them here that we'll chat through, but I'd encourage listeners to just go and have a look. Google ChatGPT in the classroom and put your seatbelt on. Be prepared to be blown away by some of the fantastic ideas there are out there. One of the most important things I think that we need to help students understand with ChatGPT is the importance of the prompt itself. So the importance of the wording that I use when I'm asking ChatGPT to do something.
Sure.
It's that old garbage in, garbage out kind of scenario. If you put a simple request in, it will give you a pretty simple answer.
Oh, friends, what an irony it is. In this conversation, we're talking about digital technology, and the technology has failed us. We lost the end of our conversation. Some things we're only going to find out in heaven, and the end of this discussion is one of them. Still, I hope you benefited richly from this discussion, and if you want to hear more on this topic, on AI and ChatGPT, make sure you let me know. You can get onto me on LinkedIn or Twitter. My links are in the show notes, and I'm always talking about this stuff over there.